morning, ladies and gentlemen. The European Union in a changed world, the European Union in a changed Europe, the European Union changing shape and ambition. Welcome to this high-level panel on the second day of the Bled Strategic Forum. And we are continuing the dialogue with the European Commission, ministers from member states, candidates, associates of the European Union. My name is Tobias Flessenkemper. I'm a fellow with the European Institute CEF, which is based in Nice, providing experience in learning and living Europe for more than 60 years. Let me quickly present you our speakers, starting from my very right, our Slovenian colleague, State Secretary Mirošić. Then we have the colleague from Moldova, Mr. Galbur, Minister Galbur, from Montenegro, Minister Pejanović, from Bulgaria, Minister Sarajeva. To my left, Commissioner Bulc, Minister Meleshkanu, Minister Loiseau from France, Meleshkanu from Romania, and Pat Cox, which is a particular pleasure for me as a former president of the European Parliament. You find more information on each of the speakers in the Bled Strategic Times and also on the app that you hopefully have downloaded. There's extensive biographies on their careers, experiences, etc. And I can really recommend you to read a bit into their biographies, because I think we have a wealth of experience here at this panel. However, we have only got 90 minutes. The forum organizers provided us with a number of ideas and topics to discuss, and members of the panel have also written in the Strategic Times, for instance, Pat Cox on Brexit. Peter Gerg, who you probably all know, Secretary General of the Forum, has provided, together with his colleagues, a couple of guiding questions to the panel. And I would like to read them a bit out to you as an audience to see where we start from. The first guiding question that the Bled Strategic Forum organizers formulated was, how can trust between member states, which has been eroded by migration and Eurozone crisis, be restored? The second question is, in view of the problems faced in concluding certain foreign trade agreements, TTIP, CETA, how will the EU be able to respond to the isolationist tendencies of the new US administration? Third question by the Bled Strategic Forum organizers, should the EU give priority over the unhindered functioning of the single market, or, given the declining trust of citizens in the European Union, should the focus be shifted to limitations resulting from the protection of social standards and preventing social dumping? And lastly, up to which point can cheaper labor be a source of competitiveness in the single market? Are the limitations on the free movement of goods and capital subject to other standards than those that apply to the right of free provision of services and labor? It's obviously a very topical question. Now, I have asked panelists before last week to look at these questions as a starting point for their considerations. We are all aware that we cannot discuss them all at length and not in all detail, but they may have taken a couple of these issues by themselves. But let me remind you also, you as an audience and all of us, that the European Union in the years 2018, 2019 is undergoing substantial change. It will change in shape, it may change in ambition, but also we are looking at a new institutional cycle, the European elections, and of course a new financing agreement, including a discussion about how much structural and development funds and regional funds should be reformed. So how did we organize this session? I will now ask our experts, our practitioners here, to start with a brief introductory statement. We will go by the alphabet. Then I will open it to you, and particularly to our distinguished keynote listeners, Director Sobkow from the Polish and Director Kotthaus from the German Foreign Ministry. We'll have a discussion with the audience, take it back to the panel, and conclude hopefully after 90 minutes, or rather after 89 minutes. Let me start with you, Commissioner Bulc. Europeans have never been so mobile. You're the Commissioner for Transport. There's never been more cross-border traffic made by road, rail, or air on the seas. Yet, how much has transport integration helped to foster convergence? How has mobility changed and our outlook for the future of the European Union, where leaders are increasingly engaged in discussions about controlling this exchange. What are you making out of this kind of paradox of more mobility, more transport, more traffic, more traveling on the one hand, and the other hand, most or many citizens feeling this is too much, we have to control it, we have to reinstall border controls, re-erect barriers to mobility?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this question, and it's much broader than it might seem. And I would certainly try to distinguish between the nature of the connectivity and the behavior of Europeans in this particular development stage of our societies. I think we are very clear on a social and on a business level that connectivity is essential if we want to make any kind of progress. So if we are connected, then we can engage. If we can engage, then we can share values, we can share our common visions, goals, missions, and somehow we become a big joint family. And that was the essential message of the European Union Treaty, to make sure, and I would invite everyone to never forget the essence of European Union, which goes back to the after Second World War, where all our founding fathers and mothers had in mind one very strong goal. To never have war on European soil. Again, which means create conditions and create frameworks that bring people so closely together that any kind of hostility on my neighbor, I feel like hostility on myself. And this still drives European vision. This is still the essential part. And of course, in order to do that, all the connectivity infrastructure means are the essential tool, being transport, and nowadays being digital, and of course being energy. These are the three infrastructure pillars that connect us all one way or the other. And I do believe that the European Union has a very clear commitment to improve efficiency on domestic market and to really introduce all new technologies. That's why digitalization, decarbonization, innovation, people-focused services are the essential part of our policies, of our projects, of our investments. But on the other hand, we should not forget that the European Union should never become a closed society, because our fundamental drive for success, and I would like to point out very clearly, the EU is still the strongest economy in the world, was that we were that we had the capacity to connect with the rest of the world, to reach out, to really create good global partnerships, and this drives us even today, even stronger, especially to reshape our global policies in a way that we are more and more engaging, and we are more and more basing, all our cooperation is based on partnership spirit. And you cannot do that without connectivity. I mean, that's why aviation is such a big topic. That's why comprehensive agreements globally are such a big topic. That's why One Road, One Belt is such a big topic, because it brings Asia and Europe together in a new way, which means on the land. So far, mostly was by the sea and by air, but we realize the technologies are now bringing really effective solutions for the land connectivity that decreases the time use, the efficiency in logistic networks and logistic chains, and this dramatically reshapes also the business models of many companies and also social models. So I believe that we need to take a look at this opportunity and continue investing and continue to stand up for openness, connectivity, global engagement, and creation of global platforms in order to allow people to engage. The other story that you open up is the story of the current temperature in the EU, which is very much reflecting our internal sphere, the way how we relate to the world, the way how we relate to our day-to-day life, and the experiences that we have as individuals. And it's true, in that level, there was a substantial impact of first economical crisis, which somehow brought uneasiness and a bit of fear in everyday's life, lack of trust in systems, in politicians, in public procurement processes and things like that. And of course that started to reflect on our attitude towards all these official structures. And this needs to be regained. And it seemed to be a fil rouge yesterday and today. My colleague Franz Zimmermann talked yesterday a lot about the fear and the impact that fear has on our day-to-day decision making. And I can only join in that. And fear is paralyzing us. And it is up to us all, to every one of you who is today here in the audience, your partners, my own personal challenge is to reassure again people that they can engage and that they can be successful, that they can be engaged, that there are jobs created, that there is a future for their children as well. I often thought I had, I think, 14 citizens dialogues in the last year and a half, and I could feel this frustration of parents not being reassured that their kids will have better life than they have. This was challenged seriously, and family is the basic nucleus, and of course it leaves tracks then in everything that we do. So I would certainly, and I'm very much engaging myself, encourage all of us to open up our dialogues, not to create closed circles, not to create elites, because elites kill the economies, elites kill the countries, successes of countries. Open up, and EU really stands up for open societies, open innovation if you want, open research and innovation. We're engaging globally on all levels. And I believe that this is the true spirit of EU that we would like to invite others in the circle to share these kind of values.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Model, openness, yet fear, and new forms of connectivity. I think these are the key elements of what you just said. Let me move over to Pat Cox. Pat, you wrote very insightful about Brexit in the Strategic Times, which I just have here and do my advertisement. Ireland and the UK were countries of the first enlargement, of the new form of openness, connectivity, and exactly overcoming fear. Joining the community helped to bring peace in Northern Ireland. Yet, what has changed? That EU integration is no longer seen as a necessary requirement to transform bilateral issues as Ireland and the UK are. And which lessons can we actually draw from this experience of the Isles, not least for the future enlargement?
Well, let me start with where you started. This is on? No, it's on. Let me start where you started, with Ireland, and broaden out into the wider European perspective. I would say when Britain decided to apply for membership of the European Economic Community, first in 1963 and then later and successfully joining in 1973, Ireland had no choice. Ireland was locked into a post-colonial trading relationship with the United Kingdom. And if Britain did something, Ireland was unfree to make a different choice. I would say that Ireland inside the European Union has been liberated from post-colonialism, whereas the United Kingdom has constantly struggled with the dusk that settled on empire and has all of these post-imperial dimensions in its own consciousness. I would say for Ireland, the experience was one of engaging in a multilateral context as a small state, but on the basis of the equality of status of states. And this was an important contributory factor to the emergence of an Anglo-Irish mature relationship, which fostered, along with the EU and United States, peace in Northern Ireland. So of course you can imagine now that on an island that knew a vicious and killing border, that we now are faced with the prospect of a rupture, this time a rupture led by or as a consequence of the British referendum. It is a source of anxiety, and I underline our appreciation that we are one of the three frontline issues that the EU 27 have adopted as a common front. And this, for a small state, and I say that to the many small states, persons who are present here, is a deeply reassuring aspect of European unity. On the wider issue, you talked about trust. I think the brutality of the consequences of the depth of our economic crisis have been quite shocking. And of course, they have impacted trust, and not just to do with EU, but even more particularly to do with national political institutions and elites. I think we have the legacy of that crisis for Europe, and it will be an issue we need to deal with in future reform, that has left a cleavage between the North and the South, between creditor and debtor states. We can't sweep that under the carpet. We've got to address those anxieties. We see the emergence partly to do with the migration question and refugees, but I think for other reasons also, the drift in fundamental values. So a degree of cleavage east-west. These issues have got to be looked at and addressed. We've seen electoral volatility. Mostly we feared electoral volatility would be negative, but it is electoral volatility which propelled Emmanuel Macron to the presidency of France, from which we distill a degree of hope and optimism. I would say in terms of mood, because trust is about mood as well as about outcomes. And I would say as regards mood, without developing it, I don't have the time, Mr. Trump's arrival, I would say not with a sense of isolationism, but with an increased sense of American nationalism through America first, which is not ipso facto isolationist. Mr. Trump is a unifying force for Europe. I think Brexit reminds us that we are part of a voluntary community of sovereign states, and that the freedom to leave is a distinguishing characteristic of that voluntary thing, and states confronted with that reminder stand back and ask, actually, what is our interest? And is this European thing in our interest? And therefore we want to remain connected to it. So I think Brexit is a unifying force for the 27. I think the return to growth and improvement in employment across the Union and the Eurozone states is positive. It shouldn't be exaggerated, but it is a mood changer from the constantly depressing negativity of collapsing growth and rising unemployment. So I think what Timmermans said yesterday, we've stood back from the brink. We await now the German elections, and then we await after that, between France and Germany, but not only France and Germany, to create the dynamics to spur some new development. And I would say then in that context, and I will conclude on this, I see my time limit is approaching, I think Mr. Timmermans yesterday said we have to do what's needed and not just what's nice. I think when we start having our European conversation, we have to say what's needed and not just say what's nice. So let me say 2 or 3 things about what I think we need. One of them, I think the scale of the ambitions that we project onto the European canvas collectively are not matched by the scale of Europe's budgetary capacity. If you want more, you pay more. You cannot build Europe on the cheap, and a budget that is less than 1% of the GDP and will lose the net contributions of the UK is a wake-up call. Get real if you want to be real. I think a second broad issue, and this will be a big part of the socio-economic debate, is the question of striking a balance between necessary rigour, which I agree with. You cannot have fiscal indiscipline. But I think in the European Union, we've allowed our discipline and rigour to become fossilised into rigidity. And we need to lift some of the rigidity while guarding the qualities of rigour. And I think there is a big issue about whether we want more community resolution of issues or more intergovernmental resolution of issues, and this will impact the nature of outcomes. And a final observation I will make on that to close is it is right that we should look at our institutions, but it is absolutely essential that we look at our toolkit, at our instruments, and we are sadly lacking in too many instruments of public policy as well as means, such as budgetary means, and these have to be part of the pragmatism of dealing with the new constitutional, institutional and political order, and that's very much in the method of Jean Monnet, who inspired all of this so many decades ago. And Jean Monnet, although an idealist in so many ways, could be deeply noted more for a pragmatism that wanted action that impacted in a real way and addressed real issues. That is the Monnet method, and find the common interest. If they did it before, we can do it again. Let's be optimistic. Let's do it.
Thank you, Pat. There are too many things to pick up, and I think they will be coming up as well in the discussion with the other colleagues. But what shines through is there is a tool, that is European Union, there is a method, and that is the community method. There is a balance to be struck with intergovernmentalism, and of course, all of this costs money and energy. And this is where you need to look at this discussion, if you look into the future, because the changed world requires this changed European Union. Let me move from the very southwestern part of our beautiful continent to the southeastern part, to Andrei Galbu, who is the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Moldova. And Moldova has obviously its share of challenges as a European country. I remind the audience of the problem of Transnistria, but also it has become an associate. It has an association agreement since a year in force. That's a tool to come closer to the elements that Pat Cox just described. And it's also a tool for a political dialogue with EU member states. Yet there seems to be also, Moldova seems to be also a front runner on controversy about where to position oneself with regard to the European Union, with regard to the Eurasian Economic Community, and also about grant orientations in Europe. And we had a foreshadowing of these grant orientation debate yesterday afternoon. So I would really invite you to share a couple of your views on where this European Union goes in this changed world. Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you very much. I think we can all agree that in recent years, the world overall has become less stable, less rules-based, I would say less predictable, or in other words, more divided. And I strongly believe that the global and major regional leaders bear the primary responsibility to reverse this trend. The EU, with its strong focus on cooperation, on free trade, on multilateralism and diplomacy, I believe has stronger moral grounds to lead this stabilization effort than any other player. But sadly enough, the number of nuclear warheads and readiness to apply military force is still more important in these days than moral leadership in international affairs. At the same time, we welcome the fact that EU is moving towards greater self-reliance in world affairs, and this is confirmed by an increased focus on strengthening security and defense. We also hope that the EU and its member states will continue to be actively involved and assume leading roles in settling major international but also regional issues. Obviously, being in the immediate neighborhood of the European Union, we are following very closely major developments that are taking place in the EU, and there are many difficult issues on the European agenda, to name a few: terrorism, migration, and so on. But I feel very encouraged that the latest Eurobarometer has shown some positive trends in public opinion, that the EU citizens have more trust and confidence towards the EU than, let's say, a year ago. So to me, this also means that the EU remains the cornerstone for stability and prosperity for citizens. The European integration is our strategic choice, and it's unfortunately, when you have a deeply polarized society, it's very difficult to have the strategic communication with your own citizens, because they're always confronted with a geopolitical choice, which is a false one, because really what people want to choose between is the models of modernization and development. And when you have these major debates about the future of the country, we always ask ourselves a question: is there a better model than the European Union for the country, for our citizens to progress and reach well-being? And the answer that we always come up with is a very clear no, that the EU is the best model to follow. And that's why our firm belief is that the European Union remains the strongest transformational and the most influential transformational power on our continent. And where is the first place where it can make a difference? I strongly believe it's the neighborhood where it can make this difference. And I will quote from the EU Global Strategy: "Fragility beyond our borders threatens all our vital interests." So by contrast, a politically stable and economically prosperous neighborhood means more security for the European Union. And security and prosperity is in big need in the eastern neighborhood of the European Union. And the best way to achieve long-term stability and development in the neighborhood is to continue to push for deep and thorough structural reforms, but also increase resilience. Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine are advancing on this path, and we have undertaken an enormous amount of very difficult commitments for reforms, which all have one big goal: to get closer to the EU, and we are working very hard to implement them. But reform motivation needs encouragement. And now that, as you mentioned, the association agreements have entered into force and their implementation is in full swing, I think now is the critical time. And our message to the European Union would be, don't decrease your political presence and attention, and don't leave these processes only to bureaucracies. Please stay fully involved and engaged at the highest political level. We are all preparing, or some of us are preparing for the Eastern Partnership Summit in Brussels that will take place less than 3 months from now. And we strongly believe that this summit should show that the EU and the Eastern partners are strongly connected by common values, but also by common political goals and by joint projects for the years to come. Obviously, there are plenty of views on areas where the European Union needs improvement, and I'm very honored to have this opportunity to give Moldova's perspective on this. If we look at the fundamental needs, most people are pointing to the areas of unity and solidarity, which need to be strengthened because they have been strongly affected by the refugee crisis. And we strongly believe that the EU will stay strong and will be able to react to challenges only if it holds its lines united. Secondly, and it has already been mentioned, the need to strengthen security. Thirdly, I would mention the need to streamline the European institutions. We believe that European bureaucracy should get more transparent, more accountable to citizens, and give less grounds for criticism. And last but not least, I think the EU needs to agree on a strategic vision of the future. There is a set of reflection papers on this, but we believe that structural discussion on these initiatives is needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrei. And I think the issues of unity, security, institutional readiness, and of course vision is something you share very much as well with our colleague from France, Minister Loiseau. As France has prepared for the elections that were already mentioned, there was this feeling in Europe of growing expectation as well. This feeling of a new president's role in bringing forward the European agenda, in bringing forward the issues that were just mentioned by Minister Galbour. How are these expectations to be met? How are these expectations to be met also in this kind of changed European scenery with which many in France have not yet come to terms? And you were one of those who mentioned that France needs to engage more in Central Eastern Europe, if I remember correctly some of the media statements in the last days. But also, of course, on the global scale. We had Federica Mogherini here yesterday and talking about resilience and the global strategy. And not least, France being soon the only P5 Permanent Security Council member who is also a member of the European Union. Now, this seems to be rather big expectations which are laid on France. How are you going to meet them?
Well, thank you for your question. I think my predecessors all mentioned that we are living a historical moment of more instability globally, with a less predictable American ally, with a very assertive Russia, with Turkey turning its back to the European path. It has been said, but yes, Turkey is further away from European integration than it was a few years ago, with a situation in the southern part of the Mediterranean, which is still very unstable and has consequences on our continent. So this should be the EU moment. This should be the moment where we all gather and understand that Europe is the answer to our questions. And still, Europe knows more and more divisions. Of course, you mentioned Brexit. It's still on the way, and Eurosceptics are still all over Europe, and we should not limit our thinking to this feeling of relief that we had in France when Emmanuel Macron was elected, because he was the most pro-European candidate. I should say the only pro-European candidate in our national election. That is to say that today, yes, in the parliament we have a very pro-European majority, but opposition is only composed of people who oppose Europe. And we cannot forget that they were elected by citizens who have questions and misunderstandings about the current status of the debates in the European Union. So, indeed, European Union is the only place where we promote individual liberties, we promote entrepreneurship, and we promote social justice at the same time. There is no other place in the world where these three values go together. But we have to make sure that they still go together. And we have been used talking only about liberty, freedom of circulation, free flow of goods, services. And rightly, one of my predecessors mentioned security. People are asking for protection. In a country like France, the question of security, of fight against terrorism, is key. It has become as high as a concern for my fellow citizens as unemployment, which was not the case 2 years ago. And I think throughout Europe, we have to bring this answer to the question of protection. Protection in a world where trade negotiation should not, we should not engage in trade negotiation with the sort of naiveness that we have had in the past. We should not indulge ourselves in protectionism, but reciprocity. What we allow to other parts of the world, we should be allowed the same thing now, or take more time before we give mandate to the European Union to negotiate. In terms of social relations, European Union has an ambition of convergence. When you join the European Union, it's because you want to have higher standards of living. Today, we have to fight harder to make sure that the European Union project is about convergence and not unfair competition between member states. We haven't done enough until now And we have to put it on the table because this is what our fellow citizens are asking, and not only in Western countries. We should do our best to fight against these artificial divisions, big and small countries, Eurozone versus the rest of Europe, founding members and newcomers, East and West, North and South, creditors and debtors. We've done it time and again for the last decade. It has not provided with any substantial progress in the project of the European Union. So yes, it's a big challenge. We consider that little can be made within the European Union if the French-German engine is not working. So we are refueling it. Of course, we are all waiting for the results of the German elections, even though suspense is not that big. But still, it's important not to interfere with an electoral campaign, because what you say in a political campaign can be very different to what you do when you're in power. But we pay a lot of attention to the relation between Paris and Berlin, but this is not exclusive to relations with each and every member state or group of member states. And we have to refuel these contacts, these exchanges of views, because there are too many prejudices within the European Union right now. And the other thing I want to mention is that we have this sort of discussions here in Bled in a very sophisticated strategic forum. We have to ask ourselves, what do our fellow citizens see and understand of what we are actually doing? We mentioned the fight against terrorism, we mentioned migrations. People want results. They don't want to hear about procedures. They are not that much interested in institutional debate, because this is our own expert questions, but they have very little impact on everyday life. So this is the reason why we have campaigned in France while proposing the idea of having what we call democratic conventions throughout Europe. Better to ask people in Europe what they think about the state of the European Union, what they expect, what they understand, what they don't understand, and then work together among decision makers, try to answer these needs and requests. We did it the other way around for decades, and we failed time and again. We are one of the countries which did it the wrong way. When we pushed for the European Constitution, and it was a Frenchman who was heading the push. We thought we were so smart that elites knew better. Then we decided everything in a small circle. And then we turned to our population and said, of course you are going to say yes. And of course they voted no. Because they didn't answer the same question. They answered about their personal concern at a very specific moment. So we are proposing other member states and the Commission and the European Parliament to engage in an audacious debate. There will be unpleasant things said about what we have done, where we have failed, but we need to give the floor to the people and then take time to decide, and it may bring us to change the treaty, but after having discussed with our people.
Thank you, Minister Loiseau. This is obviously, many of us will remember these two questions, both in 1992 on the Maastricht Treaty and in 2005. And of course the kind of change of direction the Union took. And yet I think the kind of conclusions you take from those they're manifold. We have seen a push to intergovernmentalism after 2005. We have heard today that, of course, this also needs to be checked by new methodology. So I think the invitation for a broad discussion is exactly what is needed. And that's where I am very happy to turn to Minister Meleshkani, because not only is Romania a country which I recently visited again, and I've seen that Europe is actually discussed. I was there on Europe Day, and the flags were waving, and it was also a national day. And many discussions about the future of Europe. But also Romania has been what I call a hidden champion, has been a success story of European integration despite many difficult challenges happening in the meantime. You've joined 10 years ago. You have arrived, I'd say. You will soon be taking over the presidency in 2 years' time. But how do you find yourself as Romania, a country which is southern, eastern, not so Mediterranean, but linked to France, linked to Germany? Where do you find yourself in this kind of Europe in which you have arrived after 10 years of active membership?
Thank you very much for the nice words you have said about us. It's true, I'll start with an analysis of Stratfor, in which they underlined that Romania was the most rapidly advancing countries from all the newcomers in the European Union, from the point of view of economic and social measures. And it's true, for us was a very important change, but we assisted in the last 10 years during our presence in the European Union at a succession of crises, financial, economical, migration, and I will say a very difficult challenge, which is the departure of Great Britain from the European Union. From our point of view, of course, all these are very important and have a direct impact on the European Union. But as a new country joining the European Union, we have also the impression that it is also a great opportunity for the European Union. It's for the first time in the last years that the European Union is obliged to think about the future of Europe. And from this point of view, I think what we really need, and we are feeling it as a country, a newcomer, what we really need, it's a new vision of the member states about the future of the European Union. A new vision which, in our opinion, should be adopted as much as possible through consensus and not pushing some ideas against other ideas. And secondly, the final function should be a better Europe than the Europe which exists now. It should be based on values, on principles, and policies. Now, for the values, what we have to do is to reconfirm, to reassert, and to strengthen the values for which the European Union is committed. Secondly, for the principles, we should, as it was said yesterday about Mr. Timmermans, we have to define them, to try to define them. The principle of solidarity, we are speaking a lot about it, but we don't know very well what is behind this. Every one of us has his own interpretation. The principle of convergence, Madame Loiseau was speaking about it. This kind of principles should be defined and represent real tools in the future development of the European Union. We have also to be very careful in addressing the policies which are to be directed towards the population. Security, internal security, external security of the European Union should be a top priority. The citizens are feeling it, and they need it, and they understand it. But secondly, also, a social Europe is also a very important objective, which is touching directly the citizens. That's why, from our point of view, we need a real effort to create a better Europe together. That's why we are against the idea of having a Europe with variable geometry or with different speeds and so on and so forth. We strongly believe that what we have to do is to concentrate us on convergence, to try to work together on projects, and mind you, we don't intend to create unnecessary difficulties. Of course, if a group of the countries from the European Union would like to launch a program, a certain initiative, it shouldn't be blocked, but there should be also some conditions, I think. It has to be a decision of all members of the European Union. It has to be open for those who want to join or who are capable to join the project later. And secondly, it should be based on strict criteria, not on political consideration. That's why I think to conclude these few words. As a newcomer, we strongly believe that we need a better Europe. We can do it. It's a process of reflection which is taking place. Everybody should bring its contribution. And from our point of view, the outcome, the result of this project will be of extreme importance for a country like Romania. We cannot believe in our future without a strong and inclusive European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think the element of convergence is coming up over and over again, and you know, convergence requires, of course, quite some effort and also some leap and also confidence. So, really, State Secretary Mirošić, convergence has been a problem that Slovenia has seen, or rather not seen, in the previous country, in Yugoslavia. And Slovenia was one of those countries who actually said that if we want to have European convergence, we need this institutional framework of the European Union and move into this. Now, you're not so much as a newcomer as Minister Mileshkanu said, there are now 13 years of EU membership. How do you consider then the element of converging with the European Union from the Slovenian point of view? And what are the lessons you could actually bring for this next chapter of convergence, the maybe even more complicated chapter of convergence of the future EU?
Well, I think that the main topic is the convergence.
It's okay now? Yes.
Yeah.
I think the right topic is the discussion about the convergence in the future European Union. Why? I would say the future of the European Union, whether it be internal development of the Union or the global role of the Union, will be determined by choice between two options. Whether we will determine it in a political debate, or whether we will determine it in a financial debate, I mean here in the next financial perspective or multi-annual financial framework. I'm afraid that we might do big declarations, wishes, political wishes, where we would like to go, but then we will be faced with the harsh reality in the negotiations for the next financial perspective. And it's pretty clear to me, at least to me, that the future European Union, the model of future European Union, will be defined by the next financial perspective. So the convergence is just a part of the next financial perspective talks in European Union. I think that we will be faced next year with a debate or ideas of a completely new shape or reshaping of the European Union. And here, I mean, we are talking about the ideas that are floating freely and supported by important governments, the ideas like multi-speed Europe or diversified integration there. And strengthening the Eurozone, if you would like to preserve and to strengthen the common currency, probably we will have to go to strengthen the Eurozone. And we are talking here about the priorities for the next financial perspective, like a migration security question. It was mentioned before by my predecessors. And here, again, it will become a very, I'm afraid, a very interesting but also difficult debate between, we can pretend that there is no division, but we have, besides North-South, also East-West division right now, which will come out, I'm afraid, in the debates upon future of the European Union in the negotiations for the next financial perspective. Because the views, what are the priorities of the next union are at this stage slightly different there, including the balance of powers inside the European Union between member countries and the European Commission. There are countries that would like to transfer more competencies back to the national affairs, and there are countries, and Slovenia is that one, that supports very much the communitarian method and the European Commission there. So when we talk about future of Europe and the new financial perspective, probably we will have to tackle a new social model in the European Union, but also a new cohesion model. It won't be the same like now. Probably the spending won't be the same now. Important contributor to the budget, which is Britain, is Brexit out. So the sources, the financial sources will be, I think, not bigger, but slightly lower. And of course, in that debate, as I said, a pretty tough debate will be on cohesion and convergence in the European Union. I can say that also debate on future enlargements will be part of these debates. So what shape of the European Union we will have, and probably here the dynamics will be made after the German elections together with France, because there are two countries that they are capable to move dynamics in the European Union further. What ambition we will have on a global level, and what ambition we will have inside the European Union, which will be changed, depends on mainly on the next financial perspective, what budget we will devote to the global ambitions of the European Union, what budgets we will devote for enlargement, and what budgets we will devote for extremely important cohesion matters. And we have experience, like you mentioned, from the former Yugoslavia. It's not the same, it's a completely different system in the democratic and values system, but it's true. If there is no cohesion, then the community goes very difficultly further again. In that debate, Slovenia would like to be part of the whatever will happen, core or not core Europe, but core Europe. So we see our future, because we are in economic terms and in also values, we see ourselves in the core European Union that will be probably shaped in the next years. Global competition of the European Union will have to tackle the debate on social model, or we would like to have more competitiveness. And this combination will be part of these debates in the next financial perspective. So my point is, we will decide, not just by political declarations or our wishes where to go. We can consult also citizens, but we consult citizens in the elections already. The governments have different views, and that means that also citizens of different countries have different views. So I believe that the global role and internal development will be in a bigger share determined by the future debate on the next financial perspective. What budget we will have? Eurozone budget of the strengthening Eurozone, or European Union budget. And here we have slightly different views for the beginning of the talks.
Thank you. I think this is getting really, you hear the concentration in the room. This is, of course, where a lot of interest lies, and how do you organize convergence, cohesion. But I also see, little kind of different accentuations, if you wish, on how do you consult and organize civic participation in the European project, and how do you engage different players in the future debate. Andrea, we have met a couple of years ago, and there was always these jokes, when the Western Balkans will join the European Union, the Union will have transformed quite a bit. Or there were even some people who even put the future of the Union in doubt. Now, it seems that you will be the second 28th member state. I mean, first of all, this is something which is quite amazing to be the second time something, but what will you bring into this discussion? I know you are in the process of negotiations, you're not yet there. But of course, if you look back into the history of European integration, that you found that acceding states were quite active in the discussion about the future. And I think we heard just a couple of these elements which will entail the future discussion. But also, what will you basically tell the people of Montenegro, maybe when there is the last vote, I don't know, in parliament or of a referendum, on what kind of union they're joining?
Well, thank you, Tobias. The joke was actually about how once the Western Balkans finally join, the other countries start to leave the European Union. So we are definitely living in a part of the scenario with the Brexit now. And the joke goes that there will be more and more of bureaucracy from the Western Balkans as we move in to fill in almost 90% of it. But this joke from some 10 years ago is obviously changing in the sense of how the EU is changing and how we perceive the changed modalities of how the EU evolves and how the enlargement policy evolves, because the enlargement policy cannot and couldn't stay at the same level as Thessaloniki promised, and obviously it had to go along with what was happening in the European Union. When we talk about the first part of the question, what we bring to the European Union, where we stand in relation to that, I always talk about how, when I looked at the negotiating framework of Iceland, they put as the main contribution to what they bring to Europe is their sagas. That was their view, and the very poetic kind of the foreign minister at that time put it in the very stern legal text of the negotiating position of the country. But this is really true. It's, every new member brings this new diversity to the Union, and the motto of the European Union, united in diversity. And not talking just about the culture, it's about the principles. It's about the fundamentals that we are talking about, and it's about how we all fight for something which are the principles that guide the European Union of today. It's something that started in Helsinki and something that evolved over the decades, and it's also the guiding principle of the enlargement policy, or it should be. And this is what we are discussing now, whether we are talking about influence zones, we are going backwards, or we are talking about fighting for the principles and where the enlargement country stands in this process. And that's exactly why I think that our joining of the European Union or becoming the next member state could show that could show the success of the European policy. It means that there is all of this effort put into rule of law, into fighting for the fundamentals, for democracy, for human rights, will pay off, meaning that the transformative part of the EU is still there. It is functioning as a soft part. It is changing and transforming the regions outside of it. And as Andrei said, obviously, we are also following in the same way what's happening in the EU, because the EU is the biggest magnet of all the countries, all the regions around it. And more so for us, because we are trying to become a part of the family. And in this regard, obviously, when you look at what the European citizens, the latest actually surveys showed, what the European citizens first think about the European Union, they think about the peace, about democracy, and about human rights. These are the three elements that they find as the best elements of the European Union. And this is something we need to continue to cherish, because if the EU goes away from that road, and if we talk about certain new elements or certain new, let's say, conditionalities, or if you lose conditionalities, then the whole principle is lost. We could see this with the migrant crisis, and somehow with this deal with Turkey, but not to enter into this arena. The other thing which I think we could bring as a good example is further stability to the region. I feel that the Western Balkans is still in the fragile mood. We have seen this over and over in the 90s, but also in the last 2 decades, of how this fragility can be perturbed, and how this fragility is also prone to the crises that are hitting the EU. When you look at the economic and financial crisis, it did hit the Western Balkans, a bit later on than the EU, but it had a huge influence on it. And all the good economic indicators in the early 2000s actually went back. We also saw that the migrant crisis actually hit us directly, not Montenegro, but some of the Western Balkan countries through the migrant route. So the Balkans is definitely part of the solution in this. And definitely Brexit. We are talking about the Brexit as the latest crisis. We cannot talk about the enlargement without taking into account what's going to happen in the next 2 years with Britain leaving. And in this regard, we have to think, and as Istok said, the budget and what's going to be the budget for the enlargement countries, the pre-accession funds, whether there will be another member state in the next multi-annual financial framework, and what to do if Montenegro joins. Although being small, we have to think about the sort of evolved budget that could allow for the next Parliament and the next European Commission to take into account new member states inside. And then definitely looking at the overall process of the accession, there are lots of questions and lots of views whether the region can move together, whether there could be a regional or group enlargement. We feel in Montenegro that the individual merit-based system is the only one to be pursued, because coming back to the conditionalities, if you want to have a member state which is functional, which has done the job, and which is functioning as a proper member state, there shouldn't be any kind of package solutions. There should be individual merits as the only basis for the enlargement, because look at the rule of law, obviously it's much harder. It takes more time. It takes lots of sacrifice and lots of investment from the candidate countries. But at the end, the reward is that you become a member state without any baggage, without any problems whatsoever. And then you show that the EU's policies are really doing the job. And they are transforming the country.
I think, of course, the question of the package has been always, package of enlargement has been always in this room particularly, because one could actually argue, wouldn't we be even more successful in showing that we bring in a diverse group of countries at the same time and overcoming conflict, a bit like back in the 70s, where you had like 2 countries coming at the same time to have bilateral disputes. So this argument, I think, will come back, but I'm very grateful, Andrea, that you pinpointed that there is a methodology and that we should probably always look at the methodology before we talk about such kind of changes of policy. Now, Ekaterina, we had like 7 contributions, extremely rich. I think we even haven't covered a couple of things. I mean, we haven't covered so much about the European global strategy. We haven't covered a couple of other things which we could have discussed also with the development of, justice and home affairs, etc. But you are taking over the presidency. You have been active, traveling already. You're trying to find out what is going on. And you're also from one of the success stories of enlargement. You're a NATO member. You're at the helm of the European Union next year. You will also be the first one of what I call the trio. A trio which is coming very much from a southeastern European kind of perspective. It's not a formal trio, but it will be, of course, Bulgaria, Austrian presidency, and also Austria has got elections. And then, of course, Romania, and I mentioned it. So how will you balance, say, the more kind of northwestern kind of perspectives with this kind of more southeastern drive, for which you may actually be the first president?
Hello, it's not easy to speak after so many distinguished speakers, but yeah, you're right, we didn't talk about many things that are important, but I think we talk a lot about crisis. I think, yes, we faced a lot of crisis, but I think the biggest crisis that we face is the crisis of trust and the crisis of identity. And without solving these 2 crises, no one of the others will be solved. Yesterday, on the first 2 panels, we heard a lot about the fears of our citizens. I am agree that if our citizens have fear for their life, nothing else doesn't matter. So I think that the biggest mistake of us, of politicians, and I think this is one of the reasons why there is the biggest crisis, the crisis of trust in the European institutions, but also in domestic institutions. It's that we very often in our capital, for every that is wrong in our policy, in our country, we blame Brussels. It's happened very often. And for our successes that we have as members of the European Union, okay, for example, building, making pension reforms, health reform, or building new motorway, developing our cities and villages, creating working places, economic development, for example, for Bulgaria is really not bad. Together with Romania is doing a little bit better, but we are almost 4% for this year. We'll be higher than 4%. It's our success. We forget sometimes, not in Bulgaria, because Bulgaria is really pro-European nation, but I see very often, in my country too, some of the politicians, some of the leaders of the political parties, all the successes are successes of the capitals, all the failures in our policy sometimes is mentioned as problems in Brussels. It doesn't mean that Brussels should not reform. I absolutely agree what was said before, that first question that we should answer when we decide to make some reform and to introduce some new policy is how this will influence to everyday life of our citizens. to everyday life of our citizens. And Brussels should be much more open, much more transparent and responsible. I'm absolutely agree with that. But it doesn't mean that it does. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Responding to
I think we should start to do this in our capitals. It doesn't mean that we should not reform it, we should close our eyes for the problems that we face. And yes, we'll be, I will tell one joke, in Trieste, our Prime Minister was invited, thank you, Germany and Italy for that, and other participants. And Eddie Rama, who was sitting next to, between him and Boris Johnson, was joking, since a child I was dreaming to be a member of the European Union. And maybe we'll start our accession process this year, we hope to start. And I never believed that while we're starting, Boris will leave European Union, Borisov as a Balkan country will chair the European Union. But actually, this is the things that we are joking sometimes that when all of us will be member of the European Union, maybe the others will leave. I'm not believing this. I think the European Union will be finished project for peace, stability, security, and rule of law for Europe only when other Western Balkans countries and also our friends from Eastern Partnership will be European member states. Of course, there is a long period. There is a long and difficult reforms that should be taken. But Bulgaria will not spare efforts, and one of our priorities during our presidency is enlargement of Western Balkans and enlargement procedure. And I think that all the candidates should be part of the debate. What kind of European Union we want to have? What kind of reform we want to do? I'm agree that we should include our citizens, our NGOs, our think tanks, our professors, our young generation, for sure, in this debate. Not only some clever people to decide and then to introduce the decision to the society. And I'm agree that cohesion, we debate a lot about social dumping, about new social system for Europe, but let's not to forget that Bulgaria and Romania joined European Union only 10 years ago. Croatia joined European Union only 5 years ago. And sometimes the reason in this social dumping and the low salary in our countries is like in the past. And without cohesion, but cohesion in broader sense, we will not be able to fill this gap, to bridge this gap in the near future. So in the debate for the next budget, for the next budgetary period of the European Union, having in mind that we'll have 16% less budget after Brexit for the next period, we should not forget cohesion. Cohesion is a decision of filling this gap between the member states. And I will finish with first, because I hope that we'll have time to take the floor second time, that our motto to our presidency is united we stand strong. I think that the only chance for the future of Europe is to stay united and more integration. And let's not forget that after, it's not the first crisis in Europe. And actually I think that the world is not starting changing since 2 years. It's changing all the time. And we forgot that only 10 years ago there was no social media, there were no internet. But after every crisis, the European Union come out stronger. After first biggest financial crisis, Eurozone was created. Only 5 years ago there were energy crisis, and then new integration project starts, and this is energy union. After the security crisis, we start, and the biggest priority actually for foreign and security policy of the European Union is new security and defense policy of the European Union, another integration process. So I am devoted European, and I strongly believe that after every crisis, the European Union got more stronger and more integrated. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think the title of this session was The European Union in a Changed World. I think that the world has changed. That's quite clear to all of us. What came through to me very much up here on the podium, who listened carefully, is that the change of the identity of the European Union is really something that will keep us busy in the next couple of years. And the former chief lawyer, legal advisor of the Council, Jean-Claude Piris, he wrote a very good book on the Lisbon Treaty, and he once wrote in there that the whole process of enlargement, ever since it started, 73, was always seen in much more in how much it's transformed the acceding countries. But maybe we should much more look at well, how it actually transforms the already members of the European Union. Because our identity, as you said, Ekaterina, has started to change, and we are looking at what European Union means every year anew. Now the question is, how do we do this? And this will now involve, of course, our audience here. And how do we look at this? And how will you take this forward? And we're experimenting with keynote listeners. Now the keynote listeners, they made notes. I don't know if they have the key as well to all the problems. But I would like to invite Mr. Sofkov from the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs to maybe share some of his impressions and ideas which come from this debate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let me return very briefly to Brexit, because I think that in many people, many countries, they think that this is a unique problem of Britain, and there are not lessons learned for other members of the EU, but there are. And I think we should think about those lessons learned from the UK, because this is what happened in the UK. This is not just a British problem, this is our European problem. So, for example, it's about globalization. Who has profited from globalization and who has lost from globalization? It's about the effective control of our borders. Can we somehow reconcile it with the four freedoms of the EU? It's about the role of the media. How can the media influence pro-European or anti-European attitudes? It's about education. Do people know much about the European Union, or they do not know much? And the answer is obvious. They do not know much about the European Union. So this is another task for us. This is about young people. Do they remember why we created the European communities, NATO, the UN, etc.? In many cases, they don't, and they do not realize that the European Union, the European communities, have served as a tool to prevent wars and conflicts in Europe, and this is a very important message that they should realize. It's also about the role of national parliaments versus the European Parliament, the red card, the orange card, the green card. It's also about the role of supranational courts, etc. So there is a long list of things that we should consider when we talk about the future of the European Union. Of course, there is this fear that has been mentioned here, fear of our citizens. But on the other hand, there is a role of governments and the elites and establishments and organizations and NGOs, etc., to explain to the people if those fears have some kind of foundation, or they are not, because they may be some artificial fears created, for example, by the media that is not objective. So I think this is our task for the future, to look at those fears, to look at how we can educate people about the European Union, how we can show that the European Union is useful, roaming charges, things of this kind, that really people can feel that the EU has done it for us, the Erasmus, the way young people can move and study all over Europe, etc. We should see where we need less Europe, and we should see where we need more Europe, because there are areas in both camps. And this is a task for the future. And I think next year will be crucial. We will start serious discussions about the future of the EU and how to respond to the fears of our citizens, how to respond to Brexit, how to respond to the new realities across the Atlantic. Thank you.
Thank you. Also for contextualizing a bit that, you know, Brexit is something more than Brexit. It's a discussion about certain elements and how Europe functions. Mr. Kotthaus, there was a lot, no microphone. There were a lot of calls for cohesion and convergence, including the tricky issue of money. Being myself from that member state, I know that money is quite an obsession.
Yeah, but you shouldn't reduce Germany to money,
yeah.
To put it mildly. I was really positively surprised by listening to the very good podium that in the end, the EU is the solution and not the problem. I think to sum it up, what you've all said, the EU is the solution, not the problem. I think you have to repeat it because quite often in the last few years we always perceived that the EU is the problem. No. It's a solution. It was very interesting for me to listen. I think now is the moment actually to tackle concrete problems with concrete solutions. And the incoming presidency will have to do that. And I think you pointed out very wisely and very good well what we have achieved in the last few years. And just recently, we really took a huge step forward when it comes to foreign policy, foreign security policy, a real European one. Something we've been working for decades. It didn't work out, and now we took the first steps, including investment, because you mentioned the money, investment in the European Defense Fund, which is something new, which is something positive, and we should really cherish that. And I think we have the need to do more together. We have the instruments within the treaties to do more together, and I think we have the will to do more together, and that will be all about it for the next few months and years to come. And I think the white book process that the Commission has started, and where they laid the responsibility for forming a new Europe into the hands of the member states, and did not say we have to do it that and that way, but the member states have decided how to go forward, was the right way to do it. Because in the end, EU is all member states. This is something which I wanted to mention, the famous French-German machine. It's definitely always a locomotive, and I think France and Germany has always felt a particular responsibility for Europe because this is a project that we highly cherish. But let's be honest, Europe can only function if each and every member state takes it as its own responsibility and its own will to go forward. And that sometimes the European project is bigger than the interests of one single member state. And that if we all share that view, then we can achieve something. And not only France and Germany alone, although we really feel a particular responsibility. And definitely just when it comes to trade, I would like to defend here trade once again, because we believe that trade is really part of the European DNA. And if one big partner in international trade steps out, this is a moment where Europe has to step in. Because if we let trade, if we let globalization fail, then we have altogether a problem because it's part of our DNA, part of our model. Enlargement, definitely I agree. Important also to look into the neighborhood. That's why we have the Eastern Partnership. That's why we have also the close connection to the Mediterranean. Those things remain highly to have stabilization around us. But last thing, German elections. I don't know what will be the outcome of the German elections, but one thing is for sure. It will be a pro-European government. And this is sometimes good to say, because this has not always been the moment to say that in all the elections in the last few months. So sometimes it's a bit relaxing to know, at least that's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this opens the floor, and with the permission of the Secretary General of the Forum, I'll add 15 minutes to the schedule because we started 15 minutes late with this panel. So please indicate, and I think there are some colleagues with microphones, and you don't need to ask questions, you can make statements and comments, but be short. And the ladies, your colleagues with the microphone, don't run away, don't leave the people with the microphone. So please present yourself briefly.
Tobias, thank you very much for giving me the floor. For the purposes today, on behalf of the elephants in the room, I'm Sophie Honey, and I'm a British ambassador here at Slovenia. I'm conscious that pretty much all of the speakers have mentioned Brexit, hence my comment about the personal elephant in the room. But first of all, I wanted to kick off by passing on apologies from my minister, Robin Walker, who, as Peter Gurk knows, very much wanted to be here today. It's related to the fact that my government has a narrow majority now, and Parliament started this week, that he couldn't get a slip from Parliament and therefore join the esteemed panellists this morning. I know the panel is about the European Union, but it is also about Europe. So I very much hope that if you invite us next year, Peter, we will be back on the panel next year. But please accept apologies for today. I agree with many of the things I've heard today, but I want to pick up something that Pat in particular said. And Pat, you talked about the importance of addressing difficult issues and addressing, for instance, cleavage and opinion between East and West states on fundamental values, or between net contributors and net recipient states. And I agree with that, and I think that gives an interesting take on what happened with Brexit, because for many years we have had a difficult relationship with Europe, and in some ways a cleavage of views within the UK amongst people who thought that our place was absolutely in Europe, and a set of people, someone was talking about the losers in globalisation, I think it was a Polish colleague, who felt uncomfortable. And after a long time, the decision was taken to discuss that with European colleagues and to tackle it and to have a referendum. And we got the result that we did. And that does mean that there are very difficult few months coming up. I think all of us looking at the upcoming negotiations, particularly the road to October European Council, feel that it's going to be a difficult period. So I'm not under any illusions about the challenges, but nevertheless, I would say I remain optimistic, because fundamentally I agree with you, and I think it's better to address those issues, put them out in the open, and that over the long term does lead to a better situation. I hope it will lead to a situation where the UK has a very close relationship with the EU that meets the EU's needs and interests, but also that the UK feels congruent with, that meets the views of our people and our interests. But I think also that in addressing those issues, in some ways it can be a catalyst. As our Polish colleague said, these aren't just issues that relate to the UK, there are also things to learn from. So I think it can, treated right, be a catalyst for the sort of future that Europe and her member states want. And Pat, I want to come back to one other thing you said. You talked about the EU being a voluntary community of states. And I think that is super important in the way that we all handle the negotiations in coming months. Because a voluntary community, if one member takes the view that it no longer feels quite right within that community, obviously closes off the outstanding issues, but also negotiates positively and constructively with an eye on the future to stay as close as possible, to stay as connected as possible in a way that meets the interests both of that member and of the wider community. So I think and hope that that's mostly what we've seen. Sometimes there have been slight reverberations that haven't, in my opinion, fitted with that sense of negotiating as a voluntary community. But I really hope that if that principle is respected, then over the long term, we will remain very, very connected. And bringing us back to Bled, I certainly hope to have a UK colleague on the panel next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else wants to take the floor? Could you please raise your hands? No one wants to take the floor. That's amazing. So we in the back. Okay. There's a camera in front. I'm sorry. Yes, please. That would have been surprising that no one wants to take the floor.
Thanks very much. I'm going to step here so everybody can see me. My name is Shpela Majcen-Marusic from Emuni and author for the EU 360 blog. And my question basically goes to the representative of the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who has spoken about the priorities for the next multi-annual financial framework of Slovenia, which makes sense. My keywords here that I caught were cohesion and enlargement. But my question would be wider. I'm wondering whether Slovenia has any kind of a strategic approach towards the white paper on the reform and the future of the European Union. How does the ministry, or how does Slovenia see itself, its position in the European Union in the next 10, 20, 50 years? Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the last chance. Otherwise, I would suggest that we now proceed in reverse order, and we make it a bit faster. We don't give 5 minutes each, because there's also lunch and another important panel. But I'd invite speakers to go in reverse order, and basically, you had a very particular question, of course, but to take 60 seconds only, to take the highlights from this discussion, and maybe also to say what you're going to do with that in the next couple of days. Ekaterina.
Thank you. I agree, Europe, it's not a problem, Europe is a decision. I think that more integration is better. I know it's difficult to be achieved with so many challenges that we have, but if we are honest for the problems, and the problem is not that we don't trust each other, the member states, the problem is that we don't face the problems, and we don't offer the decision of the problems fast and on the most appropriate way. I think this is the biggest problem, not that we don't trust each other, because one of the questions how we can improve the trust between the member states. And there is no matter of trust between the member states. It's a problem. The problem is that we don't place the problems fast and on the most appropriate way. And the last sentence, yes, I agree that we all regret for the decision of the British, but this is democracy. And I'm sure that the fact that Great Britain decided to leave European Union doesn't mean that they will leave Europe, and we should work all together. United, and this is one example how the other 27 can be united when we face some problem, and I hope to be united for other problems as for security, migration crisis, protect external borders, new social policy, cohesion, and other topics. And I want to finish with that of course, Bulgarian already started to work together with our Estonian and Austrian friends for solving the problems and making positive European agenda. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So, capitalize on the trust, move faster. Andrea, what are you making out of this?
Yeah, in a nutshell, just to say that what we have gathered from this panel, I think, is lots of strong messages, like the crisis of the trust. We also gathered lots of messages and ideas of how we should proceed and what is ahead of us and the possible scenarios. But I think that trying to shed some light from the candidate country, from the enlargement perspective, is that the enlargement countries are an integral part of the solution, and we should be there when we discuss these issues, important issues about the EU. We understand the mood. As Pat said, mood is a very important thing about the electorate, about the architecture of the future of Europe. And it's good that it's moving up. As it is moving up, as we are improving with the mood of population about the European Union, definitely the mood towards the enlargement is going, hopefully, to spring up, because it follows the mood about the EU itself. And we have seen that it is the lowest rate in the last years ever. And also, we are following what's happening with the multi-speed Europe, because obviously the enlargement countries are very much interested which kind of speed they are going to catch up with. And that is crucial for us, to see what kind of Europe we are going to join. And that's why we are as interested as the member states about the future and about these big, crucial questions. And I would like to thank the Bled Strategic Forum for inviting us to be a part of the discussions, because just being inside of these discussions gives us an opportunity to feel as a part of the family and something that we are going to join in several years. Thanks.
Thank you, Istok. There's a very precise question.
Thank you for the question. I think I answered partially to that, and I said that Slovenia sees itself in the most advanced whatever will be in the European Union. Of course, we would like to see a European Union working together much more in the form of 27, and this is the scenario number 5 of the white paper, I think. And I'm talking based upon my talking is based upon the 5 roundtables with the citizens. This is a citizen dialogue and an open web page dialogue of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that we are conducting with the citizens, and all of them expressed the view that Slovenia should be in the most advanced part of the European future, European Union, if there will be this one. But priority is to have 27. And if I may conclude just, I think the crucial question of future European Union is to answer the question how we will preserve middle class in the European Union. If we will fail and globalization strains severely on the middle class, then I'm afraid that we will lose political center, and that will mean that the majority in the middle class who supports the European projects might transform to the other opinions. So rescuing middle class, combined with the social model for the poorest one, is crucial for the future of the European Union. Thank you.
So thanks for bringing it back to the ambition of the European Union for prosperity. Probably something Minister Melashkanu wants to say a couple of words on. You mentioned convergence.
No, I would like to make an observation. We discussed a lot about the exit of the Great Britain. What I would like to say and to use this opportunity is that from our point of view, after the departure of the Great Britain, the European Union should do its utmost to keep Great Britain as closely as possible to the European Union. From our point of view of Romania, for economic and security reasons, I'll give you a simple example. Our foreign trade with Great Britain is 8 billion euros, which is an important amount of money for us. And secondly, from the security point of view, they are participating to the tailored forward presence of NATO and others. They are present in Romania, including ensuring for a certain period air police together with our air forces. That's why, while supporting fully the mandate of the Commission, we are looking forward at the possibility to keep them as close as possible to the European Union. They can contribute a lot to our common future. Thank you.
Mr. Loiseau, after this rich discussion, in which you entered very early on, and the different perspectives, how will you go back to Paris? I mean, by plane, yes, or by car, or by boat.
Well, yes, crossing a few borders. I would say what I heard in this panel, the common word is ambition. We all have ambition for the European Union. Member states, the Commission, countries which aspire to join the European Union, we have ambition. It means that we are ready for more efforts. European Union is about an ambition, is about values. I'm not sure there are so many question marks about what the European Union should be. It's attractive, it's desirable, but it requires efforts. It requires more engagement. We have to engage with each other among member states. Why not multi-speed Europe? The ones who are ready to do more should be able to do more with openness, attracting others, but not being blocked by the ones who are not ready. Engage with the institutions and stop the blame game where, of course, victories are national and defeats are European. This has been a very French type of sports for decades, and it brought us nowhere. Engage with countries who want to join the European Union. Yes, they will be in the club in the coming years, but there are efforts to do on every side, and so I come back to my country with a lot of ambition and enthusiasm.
Andrei, back to Chisinau.
Let me try to summarize what I am taking away from this discussion, and I will try to build my answer also on what on the question posed by the distinguished gentleman from Poland, on what is the role of the media when it comes to promoting pro but also anti-EU messages. And the key word here remains trust. It's good that the peak of mistrust has already passed, but the negative side is that there's a deep scar that has been left by certain developments, and mistrust could grow back again if another crisis outbreaks. So the short answer is that without trust and solidarity, the EU will be doomed to failure, and failure of the EU will be a real geopolitical catastrophe. That's why it's also very important not to allow those who want to use Brexit as an example or as a tool to speculate. The EU is a failed project. Is not to allow them to do that. That's why the way Brexit itself will be carried out is also a very important element, because let's not forget that the cohesion is the backbone of the European Union, but it's also the most attractive target for those who want to destabilize the Union and spoil its image. So I think work has to be done both on political but also on institutional level. Political leaders, as it has already been said, should learn the lessons and be ready to intervene and display sufficient political will. But institutions should focus on improving regulations and mechanisms that failed during the crisis. And I think it's really important to make improvements in a rather short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, how do
a few very quick comments and one very short quotation. To the UK Ambassador, please pass my regards to Minister Robin Walker, whom I had the pleasure to meet personally a few weeks after the vote, and generally to agree with the sentiment that has been expressed on the panel that while Brexit is a rupture and will carry a cost, we should, in the context, seek to define a win-win solution, because the alternative is a lose-lose option, and that is something we should not contemplate. I think in respect of the budget, it's been very interesting to hear the political honesty of the Slovenian minister, and it was always so. When it comes to paying, people are slow to put money on the table. I think the time has come to add to the question of national contributions to resurrect own resources for the European Union. Are we ever going to allow Europe to be Europe and to give it the ability to be so? I think now is the time to consider doing that. I think on the Western Balkan 6, it's a great pleasure for me to be first time here at this strategic forum, although not my first time in the beautiful city of Bled. But I would say, having experienced as a participant in Thessaloniki as President of the European Parliament, the elevation of dialogue to the highest strategic level, and now with 3 presidencies of this region coming up, the time to put the Western Balkan 6 back at the strategic table for dialogue has come, and I think that should be a message from here today. I think, finally, if I could say it, that because a truth is old and has been sustained, doesn't make it less true. The question of the benefit of Europe to Europeans by reconciling our differences and working on common interest. A brief quote, a letter written on the 23rd of January 1963 by President John Fitzgerald Kennedy and addressed to Jean Monnet. It marked the occasion of the award by Kennedy of the US Presidential Medal of Honor on Monnet. I quote, "For centuries, emperors, kings, and dictators have sought to impose unity on Europe by force. For better or worse, they have failed. But under your inspiration, Europe has moved closer to unity in less than 20 years than it had done in 1,000 years before. You and your associates have built with the mortar of reason and with the brick of economic and political interest. You are transforming Europe by the power of a constructive idea. The power of a constructive idea is the heartbeat of the European idea, and it's a heartbeat that we have to keep beating and alive."
Thank you. Commissioner, you have to bring this back to the table, and the white paper and the options. What are you taking out from this?
First, I am really grateful to be able to hear all this incredible thoughts and very strength in the speeches that is very engaging There is no sadness or giving up or we are defeated type of philosophy. It is philosophy that's engaging everyone, and this is the message I will take back to Brussels as well today. The other one that resonates with me very much is that there is a really big hope. I'll tell you why. Because we are getting really aware what the problems are. And we cannot address the problems that we are not aware of. So this is really important step, and I see that these agreements on what the problems are converging. And we are agreeing on the key elements. So that kind of brings strength back to what EU really is. Besides very strongly pointed peace project, rule of law, equality, inclusion. But what EU really is, to put it in a little bit more modern language, is a platform where diversity meets and can define the highest common denominator. Not the lowest, but the highest. The one that is really aspirational. And of course, Brexit gave us a lesson. Trump gave us a lesson on a global scale. Refugee crisis really gave us a very strong mirror. And also terrorism shaken up EU. But what it showed is, where do we need to evolve next? And you mentioned, many of you mentioned that the tools are necessary. We were lacking tools. These are challenges that we have not seen before in that kind of scale, so we didn't even have a tools to address. But look at this, in 2.5 years, this is extremely short time. We got together, we developed tools, and we are now willing to engage and start addressing these challenges. And that gives me incredible reassurance, and I'm fully engaged and devoted to this European project. So I'd like to really invite all of you that we keep this in mind and we feel that we are part of it. One thing that is missing is a true platform, true mechanism for the engagement of the youth, to give them space that they can create Europe of the future. This is our responsibility, to create space. They will create tools and platforms, but we need to give them a space. And that was a strong message yesterday as well. The other element that is still missing, and we need to give it a space too, is the democratic tools need to evolve. We keep talking about only economical and social frameworks. This is a matter of governments. But in parallel to capitalism, whichever forum it comes, there is a democracy that has nothing to do with capitalism, really, and needs development too, and we have not invested. And I personally am testing participatory models now in every formation of a legislative act. And it's amazing. When you engage with unions, with businesses, with NGOs, with citizens, project holders, they bring richness to the table, and I believe that the legislations that we're proposing are, because of that, much more stable, much more inclusive, and have sustainable dimension. So this is another element that we need to start seriously thinking on. The third one is, we need to really push women's involvement. I mean, in transport itself, we have only 26% of women engaged. I mean, what a waste of intellectual, social, emotional, and spiritual capital. Yeah? So, yeah, so we need to build on the positive experiences that are there. So this is our momentum where we can engage better on that respect. So once we start addressing this, we will feel that EU is never-ending project. It's a never-ending process. It has to constantly reshape. We mentioned today we need to find a fresh identity, but it's not like starting from scratch. We just need to allow ourselves that we evolve. No more static structures, no more static opinions, but a very dynamic, very inclusive, modern models of engagement. And I tell you, when I go around the world, and this will be my final thought, there are places all over the world that are studying our models because they want to reach this kind of democracy, they want to reach this kind of engagement, they want to reach this kind of dynamic capitalism that is inclusive. So we are an inspiration, and that comes with obligation. We have to continue to develop, and only together, when we have this diversity at the table, we can create something that will be inspirational. And the historical books would once say, there was at one time in the history of this humankind and a really inspiring structure that was able to evolve and involve everyone to feel to be part of it. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Much, dear panelists. Of course, this is not a never-ending story. This is an ending story of this discussion. Please take it forward in the various other panels. The next panel here is on the Southern Mediterranean, another issue which we didn't touch upon here. It's obviously one of the spaces that will shape the future of the EU. Thank you very much.